ham radio versus CB radio. What are the differences? Which one does what? What can you expect from each one? Let's take a look at it today.
Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to the channel. My name's Jason. I'm KC5HWB. This is Ham Radio 2.0, where we talk about reviews, news, and how-tos of lots of things that are new in amateur radio. And I thank you for joining us today on this episode. So let me say, first off, a big disclaimer. I do not hate CB radio. I don't. I do not hate CB radio. I came up with this idea for the Versus series of videos, which I'll link the playlist right here. This will be the second or third Versus video I've done. I'm taking ham radio and comparing it to other things. I got my start on CB radio, and I think if a lot of ham radio operators were honest with you, they would say that they got their start on CB radio as well. Some people whose parents were not hams, my mom and dad were not hams. I never had any hams in my family. I'm the first ham radio operator in my family. As far as I know, as far back as people who've been alive since I've been alive, I've never known another ham radio operator in my family. But I had CB radios when I was in junior high. We had a base station in junior high school. And when I got into high school and got my first driver's license, we put CB radios in our cars, my friends and I, because we all lived in different towns, but we'd meet up on the weekends and go do stuff together. And they were an easy way to communicate for free. I mean, you just bought the CB radio, put it in your car, and then you can talk on it as much as you want to. This was back during a time when cell phone providers such as AT&T and what used to be Southwestern Mobile Systems or Singular at the time. This was back at a time when they would charge you for daytime rates. Like you would get free nights and weekends after 8 p.m. at night, and after 8 p.m. on Friday, it would start charging you again at like 6 a.m. on Monday, and then 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. overnight. You'd get free talk time. This was before data plans even. This is how they made their money, was by getting you to talk during the day, or charging you to talk during the day. So it got really expensive, signing a 1 or 2 year contract for a cell phone, and then having to pay 20, 30, 35 cents a minute, whatever it was, to talk on the phone during daytime hours, which is when most people wanted to talk. So the use of CB radios was free from that aspect, because we would put CB radios in our car and drive around town, and 1 or 2 of us had base stations at our homes, and when someone got out, we'd get on a channel and we'd talk to one another. Okay, so and a CB radio, even in 2021, when this video is releasing, even in 2021, if you ever go on a road trip, a CB radio is actually a great tool to have in your vehicle. Even if you just don't, if you don't want to talk on it, then don't talk on it. Unplug the microphone, put an external mag mount antenna on your car, put the CB radio in there, plug it into the cigarette lighter, and just listen while you're going down the road. It's a great tool to have, because if you get into a traffic jam or you get into construction, all the truckers are going to be talking about what's going on the road around you, and you're going to be privy to information that's going on in your immediate area that will be talked about over the CB radio. Okay, you don't want to be driving down a traffic jam and saying, well, there's been a traffic jam up there, let me pull up my phone and look at my phone while I'm driving down the road 55 miles an hour. No, you just listen to the CB radio, and a lot of the times it'll direct you around traffic. So it's a good tool to have in your toolbox. It is not a replacement for ham radio. In fact, ham radio is pretty much an upgrade to CB radio, in my opinion, but that does not mean that CB radio has no value at all. I'll go in, I'll pull up this chart right here that says the standardized channels in the USA. Standardized channel numbering is harmonized through the FCC America and CEPT Europe. See also channel assignments for CB use in the United States. Channel 1 through 40. There was a point in time where CB radios were limited to 23 channels. That was before my time. So you can find some older CB radios that goes channels 1 to 23, but pretty much everything today is channels 1 through 40. Again, it is channelized, much like FRS and GMRS. They are channelized. So you've got channel 1 on a certain frequency, and you can't really deviate off of that much. CB radios, unlike FRS and unlike GMRS, CB radios will allow you to talk on single sideband as well as AM. So CB radios are primarily AM, but they have upper and lower single sideband, and you can use upper sideband and lower sideband all you want to. It doesn't differentiate. In ham radio, you typically will use a certain sideband on a certain band. So in other words, 40 meters on ham radio is lower sideband. 20 meters on ham radio is upper sideband. And you can use the other ones, but you're not going to find anyone out there, typically speaking. CB radio, you can use upper and lower sideband anywhere you want to on any channel, but the most common mode of transmission is AM. CB radio is what we commonly refer to in the ham radio world as 11 meters. As I've explained before, the meters, as referred to in bands, is an actual measurement, like the metric measurement of 1 meter, which is just over 3 feet, just a little bit farther than a yard. So the metric measurement of 1 meter is how we measure wavelength in radio frequencies. So 11 meters is roughly the measurement of wavelength of the CB band in the USA. We have a band in the USA for ham radio called 10 meters, which is around 28 to 29 megahertz. We have a band for 12 meters, which is around 24 megahertz. The 11 meter band, or the CB radio band, is stuck in there right between those two, and it starts with 26.995 megahertz for channel 1, and it goes up to 27.405 megahertz for channel 40. So you can talk on you can talk on any channel you want to in there. On AM, typically on AM. Some radios, not all radios will do single sideband, but there are CB radios out there that will do single sideband. But you are limited to one band. You can't talk anywhere, not legally speaking, you can't talk anywhere outside of these 40 channels on CB radio. But you don't need a license. You don't even need to get on the FCC website and fill out a form the way you do for GMRS. CB radios are much like FRS radios, in which anybody can buy them. You don't need a license to operate them. CB radios are legally limited to 4 watts on what's called a dead key, or what's called a carrier. But since they are AM, they are amplitude modulation, and the power of what's called the modulated carrier, or what's commonly referred to in the CB world as swing, can vary from radio to radio. Now, you found a lot of CB radios out there where people have tuned up the radio and added a bunch of power to it. And you know what? To each his own. That's technically not legal to do. 4 watts is the limit on CB radio power. But even with that 4 watts and an external antenna, you're going to get out farther than an FRS radio that has a fixed antenna on a handheld radio. There's no such thing as a mobile version of an FRS radio. You can get mobile versions of GMRS, and GMRS, you can legally use more power. So if you were to go from its infancy starting radios up to the highest grade, or professional, it's not professional, but highest grade radios, you would go FRS radio, which is a handheld only, limited to 2 watts or less, fixed antenna, no external, no mobile radio, no external antennas. And then you would go to CB radio next up, which is limit to 4 watts on power. You can use handheld CBs, you can use mobile CBs, you can use external antennas, which external antennas sometimes can raise your effective radiated power, what's called the EIRP, the effective radiated power of the antenna. The antenna can make it sound like, or make the radio act like, it actually has more power than it does, depending on how your antenna is built. You can look that up and research more on that later. And then from CB radio, then you go to GMRS, which you can legally use both handheld and mobile radios, but up to 50 watts in a mobile radio. And then, of course, in ham radio, we have multiple bands, multiple frequencies, multiple places we can use the radio. We can use 100-watt amplifiers legally on VHF and UHF. We can use up to 1,500 watts on a 10 and 12 meter station. So while your CB radio in the 11 meter band is limited to 4 watts, ham radio does not have that limitation. Ham radio in the 10 meter and the 12 meter bands, which are right on either side of the 11 meter band, we can use up to 1,500 watts on those bands for amplitude modulation or single sideband. You can use, there's a lot of FM repeaters out there for 10 meters, but generally speaking, they're not using 1,500 watts. But there are 150 watt FM repeaters. We actually have one here in North Texas on 10 meters. The biggest difference between CB and ham radio is that CB is just one band. and ham radio is multiple bands. So which one do I suggest? Well, just like my other versus videos I've talked about, I suggest you get both. Hey guys, if you're finding value in this video, consider hitting that thumbs up button for me because it does help with the algorithm. All right, let's get back to it. So Jason, does that mean that you would get your ham radio and get rid of your CB radio and never use it? No. Does that mean if you have a CB radio that I should not worry about ham radio at all? No. And why is that? Because ham radio and CB radio give you different sets of frequencies that you can talk on. Now, I know a lot of you will say, well, but I've opened up my ham radio and it'll now talk on 11 meter frequencies. Yeah, okay. All right. And there's some gray area in there about whether that's legal or not, because Part 97, which is what regulates our ham radio licenses, is open to experimentation. But since the 11 meter band is not part of the ham radio allowable frequencies, there's some gray area in there. Now, you can open up your CB. In fact, most ham radios, most all band radios, such as the IC 7300 or the Yaesu FT 991 or the Yaesu FT 891, a lot of them will go to the 11 meter band and just receive only. You'll be able to monitor stuff. And if you just want a CB radio for purposes of monitoring, if you're like I was talking about earlier, just unplug your microphone and just listen. If you have a ham radio that'll go to 11 meter band, you can listen to channel 19, which is the truck driver channel, while you're on a road trip. Do that. You don't have to transmit. The only legality comes in when you're transmitting on a band that you're not supposed to be on, or when you're transmitting on a band that the radio isn't designated for. So you can monitor CB radio all you want to. You can transmit on CB with no license as long as you're on a CB radio. But with a ham radio, you get a much wider, broader range of, but you get more bands, you get more modes. In fact, I'll show you this right here. This frequency chart right here is what we get in the amateur radio world. You can see we've got 2200 meters, which is 135 kilohertz, all the way up to 23 centimeters, which is 1240 megahertz. We've got all these bands in here that we can talk on, plus 2.3 gigahertz and up, all the way up to like 275 gigahertz. Now, there's no voice radios up that high. Well, there's no commercially manufactured voice radios up that high, being that ham radio operators have ingenuity and just an experimental spirit. You've got some guys who are building transmitters and transceivers for stuff that's up that high to do phone transmissions. It's kind of fun, actually. If you've never attended the Microwave Update Conference, go look that up. Go Google that, Microwave Update Conference, and they do stuff like that. But on ham radio, you got access to multiple bands. And if you look at the top of the right-hand column here, that's your 10-meter band at 28 megahertz. And the bottom of the middle column here is your 12-meter band at 24 megahertz. The 11-meter band is wedged in right in between those. It is less power. You don't have to have a license. You don't even have to register yourself on the FCC like you do for GMRS. All you really have to do is go buy a CB radio, put it in your car, and go. Okay? But if you're talking about an emergency situation, okay, now ham radio does emergency situations well, but there's a lot more to ham radio than just MCOM. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in another video. But in an emergency situation, if you're saying, well, but you can use any transmission you want to in an emergency situation, for an immediate threat to your person, your family, or your property, that is correct. You can use any frequency you want to. But if you don't have a CB radio, or you don't have a ham radio that's been hacked to transmit on CB radio frequencies, then how are you going to call for help on 11 meters? Okay. In an actual emergency, people break out their radios. There's probably more CB radio operators in the USA than there are ham radio operators in the USA. Why not have both? Why not have one that'll do this and one will do that? Even if you never turn on the CB radio. Say, well, I only take a road trip 2 or 3 times a year. Okay. Put a CB radio in your car. Put it under your seat. Run a microphone extension up here that you can get and stuff it under your seat where you're not using it. Just turn it on a couple times a year. I don't know. It's an idea. So anyway, ham radio versus CB radio. My choice is both. Just like I've said on several other versus videos I've recorded on this channel. This will be a big playlist about comparing ham radio to other modes of two-way radio transmissions, go get your ham radio license. You will be happy that you did, but that does not mean you have to stop using CB radio, especially in instances of emergencies where people might be out there transmitting because they don't have a ham radio, or in instances of just overall road trips where there's a lot of truck drivers out there that use CB radio, and it can be a source of good information if you're going down the road and accidents happen, construction happens, and just, traffic jams for no reason at all. Those happen too. So the CB radio would be a good listing spot for that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you next time. Hey, you guys noticed that that I'm wearing the K6UDA radio t-shirt on the day I'm recording a CB video? Yeah, there's that.